Hello everyone, this is Alice at Welldoing, and today I'm talking with Clio Wood and Miriam Christie. Clio Wood is a maternal health advocate whose own experiences of postnatal health led her to found her platform And Breathe. And Miriam Christie is an integrative counsellor in South East London who specialises in pre and postnatal health. So thank you very much both for coming together today.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It would be great if we could start just with a little bit more information about what brought you to your work right now. So Clio, maybe with you, if you could share just briefly, and then we'll share more later about what brought you to founding your platform.
Absolutely. So And Breathe is a focus on family fitness and postnatal and menopause fitness. So really kind of life stage change, mental and physical well-being. And my own experience postnatally kind of led me to the conclusion that really there isn't that much support out there for kind of physical or mental health. In terms of the mother, a lot of the focus is on the baby postnatally, and we do talk a lot about self-care these days, but when I had my daughter 8 years ago, that wasn't really the case in the kind of more general conversation, and so that's kind of what led me to build up And Breathe, and also then to do a lot of my writing and journalism as well, which is then what led me to write my book, which is out soon. So yeah, really, really excited to kind of be part of that conversation and championing women's health across the world.
Absolutely. And Miriam, how did you come to specialise in this area?
Oh, congratulations on your book, Clio. That sounds really exciting. Funnily enough, actually, a lot of what Clio was saying really resonated with me. So when I was training to be a therapist, I worked for a charity dealing with loneliness, and I was teaching pre and postnatal yoga and Pilates, and really noticed that women seem to sort of get let down a lot, in that they weren't really getting the care that I felt that they deserved, and it felt like something. I guess it was something that drew me to it as I was training. So I was noticing it so much in my peers, my friendship groups, but also with the groups of women I was working with. And then personally, I was on my own journey. I was going through IVF at the time. And then I had my own quite traumatic birth and felt quite let down in the aftercare, actually, despite the best intentions of a lot of the people that were working in the system. So it really sharpened my interest for working in this area. And yeah, so that's sort of what led me here.
It just feels like sorry to interrupt, but it just feels like a really easy win as well. If you could support women in a much more preventative way in terms of well-being, particularly postnatally, and even more particularly post-traumatic birth or intervention, and things like that, it feels like you would reduce the burden so much further down the line, because I know actually, had I had help a little bit earlier, it would have saved me years of trying to find the answer, going to the doctors again and again, trying to kind of push for a result, when actually if someone had said to me at the beginning, oh, why don't you go and see a women's health physio, why don't you see a psychotherapist, or get some talking therapy, it just feels like it would have made such a difference, even to pose that question or to put it to me that was an option. And we just don't get told what the options are, I think.
No, I completely agree. I feel like there a lot of people fall through the cracks of care and support, and then they're trying really hard to find ways of helping themselves. But that's really difficult, especially when you're actually in the depths of postnatal depression yourself, or when you're finding those circumstances really hard, and to be trying to find all these answers for yourself, it's a really difficult place to be. And so, yeah, I feel similarly, if there could be a bit more of a joined up way of supporting women, we could prevent a lot of the difficulties that come postnatally, and quite a long way down the line, actually.
Yeah, so many conversations I have with women are around how to advocate for yourself within the healthcare system. And whilst that's a really powerful thing to be promoting and teaching people about, it feels quite saddening as well that we have to advocate so hard for ourselves.
Yeah, it's a shame that that's where the advice is, really. And for you, Cleo, what were the main symptoms that really indicated that it was time to get help?
So many and varied, I think you would call my symptoms, from the physical to the mental. I had a traumatic birth with my first daughter, a traumatic vaginal birth, which led to interventions and vaginal scarring and a hypertonic, which is a 2-type pelvic floor. Which wasn't helped by the birth trauma because I was so tense afterwards. And I then had some mild PTSD and developed postnatal depression after the birth. So it was all a kind of mix, really, of and a kind of jumble of thoughts. And it took lots of time for me to recognize that I actually did have some issues. It was about 2 or 3 years later before I recognized really that I did have postnatal depression and that I did need to get help. And before that, I was just getting angrier and angrier in my relationship. And obviously, that was pushing my husband and I further apart as well. And, you know, there was a point where we nearly got divorced before we were able to recognize that we needed to communicate more and work on our relationship and find a way back to each other.
Thank you. And does that resonate, Miriam, from what you see in your practice, this kind of long experience of difficulties before people reach out?
Yes, it really does. I think that, you know, actually as a society where once upon a time we might have been able to rely on a lot of different people and a whole network, somehow we've been led to believe that now it's all about us and we have to be self-sufficient and must do it all on our own. And that leads to such a sense of failure and shame and guilt that actually sometimes it takes a long time before people say, I'm not okay and I need some help. And even to be able to acknowledge that in yourself, because it can feel like a failing and it's not. Actually, you need some help and we all do. But actually to be able to then say, even to admit to yourself and to admit to others that you're not doing okay can feel like a really big hurdle, and it can somehow feel like a shame that's some failing in you. And so yeah, it does resonate and it can be quite common.
And I really recognize what you're saying there as well around, you know, actually being vulnerable is one of the hardest things that you can do, and that sense of shame is huge because you feel like you're failing and because you feel like, and I think this is really important, you feel like everyone else around you is doing okay, and actually they're not. It's just that that's what we tell everyone else. That's the public face we present, isn't it?
And are you talking particularly about other mothers or just people in general and their mental health there?
Both, I think. I think for motherhood, it's particularly hard. We are judged a lot as women, and as mothers even more so, I would say. Everyone feels like they have something to say, some advice to give, even when they're not mothers, which I find absolutely astonishing. But the amount of advice that has been foisted upon me unnecessarily is just huge. I didn't ask for it. I'm parenting perfectly well on my own, thank you very much. I might be having a bad day, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you can come along and stick your oar in. And I know that many, many other women have experienced that as well.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I actually think that's where therapy can come in really handy, actually, and that it's a one space sometimes where somebody isn't telling you what you should do and giving you a piece of unsolicited advice and telling you something you didn't even ask for in the first place. It's kind of a place where you get to talk about what's going on for you and have that honored and to be really seen for exactly what your subjective experience is, as opposed to what you should be feeling or what other people are telling you to do.
Absolutely. Did you have an experience with therapy, Cleo? Is that how you found it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was my husband actually that pushed me to it in the end. He was like, no, seriously, you need to get some help. This cannot go on. He had already seen the therapy light and was seeing a therapist. I had had some experience of therapy previously, you know, many years before in our relationship. But yes, I then started seeing a CBT counsellor and had a great number of sessions with him, and they were super helpful and powerful. And then at a later point, we actually did couples therapy together, which was incredibly helpful in terms of providing a safe and an objective space, I suppose, where we both could have our say, but also feel heard and feel seen. And you know, that person is a kind of natural referee, I suppose, in that interaction, which you don't have when you're at home. It's a, you know, obviously that therapists are incredibly skilled at what they do, but that's a really at the heart of the role, I always think, is that ability to hold that space for two people who need to communicate but can't.
And I mean, on the subject of couples, do you see many people, Miriam, in your practice who, because obviously postnatal depression can affect both parties, the birthing parent and the other. I mean, do you see many couples or partners of people?
I actually work with individuals personally. Just going back to what we were saying, it's sometimes really valuable to have your own space where you don't have to censor what you're saying and look after somebody else's feelings. That's not to say if somebody wanted to have their partner there in the initial sessions for to support them, that wouldn't be okay. That would be absolutely fine. But I tend to work on an individual basis. Where there's a caveat to that is that sometimes the baby comes along, and that can be really nice too, I guess, for two different reasons, to be honest. I never want childcare to be a boundary to somebody getting support. But also sometimes the bond can be affected when you have postnatal depression, and that can also be quite shaming and quite scary. And so being able to bring your baby and talk about that and cultivate a little bit of the bond together in a safe space can be really powerful as well.
Incredible, isn't it? I found how my relationships with both my daughter and my husband were really impacted by my own mental health. And you know, we sort of think of it as quite a self thing, but it actually affects all of the, you know, different interactions that we have in everyday life and in our personal lives, doesn't it? And I just, yeah, I think if you could help people to understand the impact that mental health has on your sexual well-being and your relationship and marriage and so on as well, it would really kind of help open up that conversation even further, because I think, you know, that aspect of it isn't really I mean, we talk a lot about mental health now and we're much more open about it, but that aspect of it still perhaps isn't as touched upon as it could be.
Yeah, so true. It creates a vicious circle, doesn't it, where then you're more isolated and things can get even harder.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a lot of the reason that it kind of inspired us to go to couples therapy in the first place, was because we could recognize that both of our mental health positions was actually, you know, not putting us in a great place as a couple. So we saw therapists individually, but then also saw a different therapist as a couple, and that was really the right decision for us. But I think people don't realize, you know, it's okay to see more than one therapist in the family, like, or you know, if you don't find the right therapist first time around, doesn't mean that therapy isn't for you. You know, you might not have found the right person yet. There's all these little things that kind of scare people or make people nervous about thinking about talking therapy in the first place, because it does feel like a bit of an unknown. We don't really talk about the ins and outs of it as much as we do for other aspects of healthcare.
It's okay. What you were saying earlier really resonated as well, in that we of course have a knock-on effect with each other when we're struggling with something. And I often really admire the women that I see, because a lot of what they're coming to me with is a real sense of wanting to be better for other people, or feeling like they're letting other people people down. And actually it does start with the mother often. If you are okay, then your husband will be better, your child will be better. So you are doing it for just even focusing on yourself is quite an altruistic move, but they often start outwards in, how can I be better for somebody else? It's not about me. And so it's sort of replacing the me, starting from a place of inside so that we can work outside rather than the other way around. But it's often such a generous place that they're starting from, even though that they're at their lowest ebb often.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that gets forgotten, I mean, obviously my part of my passion in terms of women's health is kind of women's sexual well-being as well, particularly motherhood. And that's the focus of the book that I've written. And I think that's, you know, it's one of those things that again gets pushed on the back burner, just in kind of response to your comment about how altruistic it can be. You know, we kind of forget how important that aspect of our well-being is. And, you know, let's face it, it's the reason that we became mothers in the first place. You can't become a mother without having sex first. It's the reason that you were in that relationship. Otherwise, you may as well be friends. You know, the friendship part is obviously a kind of deep part of a marriage or a long-term relationship, but so is the sexual and the intimate side of things. And, you know, I think that's something that gets forgotten as well. And you know, if you can put those pieces of the well-being puzzle together, it's incredible how much better the picture can be. But when you're in it, it's really hard to see that because there's just so much else going on. But yeah, that was kind of where that's kind of where the inspiration came from for my book as well, which is called Get Your Mojo Back. And I am all about getting back to you.
That's a fantastic name for a book. I think it does encompass that, because motherhood can be all consuming and it's like an extra element of someone's identity now, but it can almost smother the rest of your identity for a little while. And I guess that's the matrescence element. It's learning who you are now and where you're going, and being able to get your mojo back, but also move into a new kind of mojo at the same time. I think it can feel like a loss of identity for a while before you are able to transform into this new identity.
And that transition is so hard, isn't it? I'm sure you see this a lot in your work, but like, you know, I don't think anything really prepares us for becoming a mother, because no one can really describe that accurately. And even if someone could, you might not believe it. And we all experience it in different ways anyway. But that identity piece is really at the heart of the difficulties that we can experience mentally and physically shifting into motherhood, I think.
Such a key point, that it's not just, you know, if you have a really adverse experience during the process of pregnancy or labor, but it's just the sheer fact of transitioning from one place in your life to another is a massively valid reason that you might need help as well.
Yeah, because everything that you thought you were suddenly has changed and shifted, and all of the things that you knew and were confident in, suddenly you're in this space where you're not confident or knowledgeable in anything about this wailing baby in your arms. And that can really throw you, especially these days when a lot of us have successful careers, we're going out to work, we're supporting ourselves, we're part of a unit that is supporting itself, building a life together, and you feel like you know what you're doing. And, you know, motherhood can be the first time where we feel like we don't really know what we're doing for the first time in a long time. And that's really jarring.
Incredibly jarring. It's such hard work, and yet a lot of it is unseen and feels really unappreciated. And I think a lot of that is in a lot of that work is in being seen and being acknowledged, isn't it? Because actually, I mean, every day there are various different demands put on you as a mum, and they're just expected. You just jump to them and have to fulfill them, and it's almost like everything else that is important to you gets put to one side. And I think society, people just don't see this. So women are working incredibly hard just to stay above water sometimes, keep their head above water.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, as you say, that motherhood identity, it does tend to kind of consume everything about you, and then you kind of forget some of the other fun things that you did before. You know, who are you without a child hanging off you? And that's, you know, that's your fun identity, that's your friendship identity, it's your identity outside of the home, you know, it's your intimate identity, it's how you relate to your partner, all of these different things that we kind of, you know, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for actually, you know, how chameleon-like we can be, and how we adapt.
Totally. I mean, on this, and this is to both of you really, what would your kind of tips or advice be for any new mums?
Where to start?
Yeah.
What people used to say to me, which I really, really hated, was like, get more sleep. You should just get more sleep. Like, oh my God. So I'll refrain from that one. I think what's really something that a lot of my clients share is that I think they have a lot of people have grown up with the belief that to ask for help is somehow to reveal a failing in you, whereas actually being able to ask for help when you need it, and quite specifically what you need, when and where, is actually a strength. So I guess if I was to give any advice, it would be maybe to practice asking for help. To maybe use the networks that you have to your advantage, because it goes around. You'll be there to support them, and they're there to support you. So, you know, there's a circular economy about that.
I suppose as well, related to that, mine would be around knowing that good enough is good enough, because no one is a perfect mother, but everyone is a good mother. And whether you think you're doing a good job or not, you know, there's so much leeway in there for us to criticize ourselves because of what we're seeing, because of what we assume other people are doing, because of what we should be feeding our children, how often they should be sleeping, you know, how they should be behaving. And actually, if they're happy and you're happy and you have a good relationship, or, you know, a good enough relationship, then that is good enough. You're doing your best, and that's okay. And I think that goes for kind of the parenting side of things, but also for your own identity and self-care piece as well. You know, we can feel a lot of pressure these days talking about kind of self-care and getting time for yourself and making time to go and see your friends and going on a date night. And in a way, that can feel like even more pressure that you're putting on yourselves. And actually, you know, if you just have a conversation with your partner once a week without the children, that's as good as going out for a date night every week. You know, if you make the time to have a bath for 20 minutes on your own, that's good. That's as good as going out for a spa day, or, you know, making sure that you know, taking time out to go and see your friends. It doesn't have to be the really big things that make a difference. You know, the kind of self-care piece, you can kind of view that through the good enough lens as well, and that can make a real difference to your own well-being and your sexual well-being and your relationship as well.
That's great advice. That takes me back to my experience of my son was born the day before lockdown, and all of my previous standards of hygiene, appearance, everything just kind of plummeted. And I probably never got back to where I was, but I think that's probably a good thing, actually. There's a certain an element of like, you know what, it's good enough. And I think maybe that's freed me a little bit. And so it can end up being a positive piece, actually, that good enough, can't it? I remember one of my first clients, I just got back into work after maternity leave, and I sat down and I was feeling really good about getting back to work, and I looked down and I realized I had a big dairy lace smear right across my boobs, and there was no time to really do much about it. I just thought, I'm going to have to just style this out. And actually the session was fine and the client came back, and I thought to myself, maybe they thought, well, like if she can sit and be a therapist with a big cheese smear on her chest, then maybe I can come to therapy and we don't have to be perfect. And, you know, he may never have noticed it, but that was sort of how I reconciled it with myself. Actually, we're just doing the best we can, and maybe you don't have to appear like you're perfect all the time. It's okay. So yeah, good enough. That's good advice, Cleo.
I love that, both of you. Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll wrap up on the cheese spread.
Oh gosh, I'll leave you with that though.
Feels like a great note. But thank you so much for your time, both. It was really valuable insights.
Thank you. That was great to meet you all.